Coming up on Regarding Men, we're all terrorists now.
Hello there. I think I'm having technical difficulties, so if I'm freezing on screen, you'll know why. I'm Janice Fiamengo, and I am very pleased to welcome you all to Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard, and we are happy to promote the death of red pill isolation. And I'm joined with my two favorite comrades in arms, rhetorical arms that is, and they are Paul Elam of paulelam.com and Tom Golden of Men Are Good.
Men are good.
And we are discussing today the designation of various men's groups as terrorist entities and whether that's a good idea or not. We're going to start off by looking at an excellent article that was published in a journal called, I wrote it down, Homeland Security Today. Sorry about that. I've got mind blanks going on today. Homeland Security Today had an excellent article. It's one of the most sensitive and insightful articles that I've ever read, I think, about the group of young men who call themselves incels and the huffing and puffing that has gone on over the last few years amongst academics in particular, especially feminist academics, of course, and then politicians and various security experts about the threat that they allegedly pose. And so this article was written by a group of writers, none of whom I knew except for one, a woman named Nama Cates. I know her because she's been interviewed on Honey Badger Radio on a number of occasions.
Really?
She does a weekly issue, and she is excellent. She has taken, in her own words, I think, deep dives into the incel community. She approaches incels with empathy as well as deep interest and concern. And she has a weekly podcast about incels. And I think that very profound knowledge and empathy really comes through in this article, which makes the not particularly surprising but much needed argument that simply focusing on incel violence and demonizing all incels as potential terrorist threats is not a very useful approach, and in fact, looking with interest at the grievances, the antecedent causes that produce incels is a much more productive response. And this article, maybe you could put it up, Tom, the title of it there. The article is called "What Incels Can Tell Us About Isolation, Resentment, and Terror Designations." And the main argument that is made in the article is that, guess what? Surprise, surprise. If you take a group of young men who are characterized by their sense of total isolation, total alienation, abject loneliness, unwantedness, and you designate that group a terrorist threat, they resent it. And given that incels are characterized by... Yeah, you don't say. Yeah, wow. It doesn't actually help things. It makes their sense of isolation and resentment far greater rather than far less. So why is it that so many academics and researchers are really enthusiastic about having them classified as terrorists? Yes. That's essentially the argument overall. And the article makes a number of really important points about who incels are, and the problems, the theoretical and practical problems of designating them as members of a terrorist group.
You want that first page up, Janice?
Not yet. No, let's
Okay.
talk about the article in general
Okay.
first. I don't know if you guys want to jump in and say something about it. The basis of the article is a survey that was done and that was answered by quite a few of the community members of a group called incels.co. And it was basically asking about COVID-19 and the effect of COVID-19 restrictions, lockdowns, etc., on the sense of isolation and resentment that incels experienced. And apparently there's been some talk, especially over the past summer, about amongst researchers about how the effects of lockdown might actually increase the terror potential or the violent potential of incels, because they would be even more alienated, isolated, and resentful. And oh, by the way, if for anybody who doesn't know, I'm sorry I jumped ahead here. Incel is just a designation. It's a self-description for those who consider themselves involuntarily celibate. I'm sure everybody knows that. This is a group of young men, mostly young men, I guess, who meet online and talk about the fact that they feel completely unable to form romantic and sexual relationships. They believe that society is heavily hierarchical, that it's biased, especially against men who are perceived by women as unattractive for various reasons, and that they feel a deep resentment at the fact that they are prevented in their lives from forming intimate bonds with women. They feel that they are arrested in their development as human beings, that they're regarded as the scum of the earth, the lowest of the low, they're at the very bottom of the social hierarchy. And they meet online to discuss their anger and resentment at that fact, at the injustice, the social injustice that they feel they are victimized by. And so the sort of the premise for this article was that a lot of researchers had claimed COVID-19 was going to be disastrous for this group of people because it was going to increase their isolation and their resentment. So there was this survey that was conducted, and the result was that number of quite a few incels answered the survey, and it asked them, as a result of COVID-19 restrictions, do you feel more or less isolated or no change? Do you feel more or less resentful or no change? And finally, what do you think about this designation by CSIS, in particular, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, that you be considered a terrorist entity? And not that surprisingly, the answer was that there was really little change in the sense of isolation as a result of COVID-19. A lot of guys said, I'm already isolated.
Right.
I can't be any more isolated. I already, have no community. I'm not part of anything, so I don't feel any different. And asked about their resentment, most said, I don't feel more resentment. A few even said, I feel like, well, at least maybe some other people now understand what I'm going through, right, and know something about my life. So a few felt somewhat less resentful, but most said no, not really any differently. Some said kind of sick and tired of hearing people complain about a 3-month lockdown. Well, I've been in lockdown for my entire life. Yes. And so that somewhat opposed the statements of these various researchers, right, who had worried about the effects of lockdown. But the thing that was really significant, and again, not surprising, was that the designation of incels as terrorists did increase. A majority of respondents said their sense of isolation and their sense of resentment did increase as a result of that they were angered, bitter, and resentful about the fact that because a few self-described incels have committed acts of violence. Every single person who goes online to seek out a community to talk about their situation is thus designated. They felt angry that there was so little attempt to understand their situation. And certainly they felt that they were not going to be inclined to any more inclined, certainly far less inclined to talk about their situation. If they're being designated as potential terrorists, they're obviously going to become far more isolated and unable to, talk about who they are and their problems with anybody outside their online community. And one guy said, it is my right to recognize the lousiness of my life, to recognize that I can't have a relationship that I long for. And it's my right to talk about that anonymously online without being designated a terrorist threat.
Amen.
Well, apparently it's not as right according to the
Yeah.
Canadian government, because they
Yeah.
have, in fact, and I think we should make sure that we stress this. The Canadian government has designated incels to be a terrorist group. I mean, it's unthinkable to me that something like that could happen, but perhaps I shouldn't be surprised. The government and left-leaning organizations across the world have been targeting anybody who may not agree with feminist orthodoxy as being some sort of potential threat.
Yes.
There's been a threat narrative built around all of them. I think it's interesting too, and because I've actually talked to some incels, which I doubt if anybody in the Canadian government did. A lot of these guys, by the way, are handicapped. They have physical disabilities, and
Yeah.
that's the reason they may be in wheelchairs, or they may be even unable to do the simplest things physically, which does put their sexual market value down at the bottom and ends up with a lot of loneliness and feelings of rejection. And the idea of mental health services across the world is that when you have people who are isolated and feel rejected and disconnected, the goal is to connect them. If the Canadian government wanted to do something to improve this situation, they would recognize this as a disability and start funding it and start doing something about it. But they're not, because a lot of incels will not agree with feminist orthodoxy. They do the same thing to them that they've done. Well, they put a voice for men. The SPLC designated us as a hate group. This has been the same thing happened with the pickup artist community in Rouge. They were designated as a hate group. Yeah. And the one thing, I mean, there's vast differences between incels and MRAs and PUAs and all these disparate groups that we loosely label as the manosphere. A lot of these groups don't even get along with each other. Philosophically, they're very, very different. But one thing that seems to bind them all together is a distaste for feminism and for feminist orthodoxy.
Right.
Therefore, that's why they're attacked, and why you see in places, like Vox and others, them targeted as we're all lumped into one group. Thus, we're all terrorists now. This is the trend that's going on. That they're trying to create, that anybody that dissents from feminist orthodoxy is a potential physical threat to everybody around them, to the society that they live in, and indeed to the nation that they're citizens of. It's very scary stuff. And now with a radical left leadership in Washington, D.C., I predict we're going to see this trend worsen significantly over the next 4 years.
Yep. Yeah. It's amazing to watch, and that article was just a breath of fresh air. I mean, I couldn't believe I was reading it when I was first looking at it. It's like, what? Yeah. Someone who really has compassion for incels? Wow. It was like a shock. But really, I mean, what the incels and what the MRAs and whoever are working against is a whole flotilla of different organizations and people who are working together to kind of make us look bad. Look at what happened to the incels. I mean, we got big tech, we got the media, we got the politicians, we got Hollywood, We got all these things working together to make the incels look bad. I mean, just a couple of them have been violent. And so now all of them must be violent.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, what a crazy fallacy. How can
It
people
really
even.
is.
And they do the same thing like with Paul. I mean, they tried to put, Paul and AVFM into that box. And I think you fought back and you got out of it, right, Paul?
Well, I mean, it's still at the SPL website. They actually, after the Red Pill movie came out, and Cassie called the director of the SPLC, had him on the phone, Mark Potop, I think his name is, and he admitted on the phone, no, we were never designated as a hate group. Well, apparently the feminists didn't like that, because just a few months after the movie released, they went ahead and officially put us on the hate register
Is
at
that
the
right?
SPL. Yes.
Hmm.
Once it was exposed that they had not done that, I guarantee you the sisterhood went on a rampage with those guys until they did it. And it probably didn't take too much effort.
Yeah.
And again, for me personally, I'm physically healthy, whatever, healthy enough. I don't give a damn what the SPLC has to say about me or the people I associate with. Their opinion is, well, it's worth what it's worth. That and $6 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. But we're talking about, with the incel community, we're talking about men that are physically challenged, that have all kinds of issues in their lives already, men that
Yeah.
really need our support.
Yes.
And rather than getting support, the Canadian government is attacking them
Yes.
and trying to make them a threat to everybody. So we'll further isolate them. And I want to point out something John Kennedy said. He said, and I'm thinking along the same lines here. If the government should pay attention to the idea that if you make peaceful revolution impossible, you make violent revolution inevitable.
Yeah.
Kennedy couldn't have been more right about that. And they will push these guys until they act out. Then they'll take their acting out and say, see, here, we told you they're violent, they're dangerous, let's crush them some more.
Yep.
And we will watch this stuff happen, unfortunately powerless to do anything about it. But that seems to be the path that they're on. It's absolutely disgusting.
It's crazy.
It really is disgusting. And because I could see if you're dealing with an actual terrorist group like Al Qaeda or whatever, or ISIS, and yes, there you do want to prevent those people from being able to communicate with one another if their communications are in the nature of planning terrorist attacks and spreading an ideology that outright declares that terrorist attacks are the whole purpose of the movement. That is not the case with incels.
Duh.
As this article points out, these are people who go online. It's the only way they can find friendship and some kind of support. There is no evidence that there is widespread support, or certainly not promotion, of violence by incels. Incels are not a political ideology. They do not have a political manifesto. They do not seek to overthrow society in order to install some other kind of regime. It is ludicrous to place inceldom, as this article uses the term, alongside radical Islamic terrorism or any other kind of terrorism. It simply is not. And the notion that preventing incels from communicating with one another is going to in any way reduce the likelihood, which is a small likelihood, of violence, is just, it's nonsense and very dangerous. I mean, you really have to believe that some number of these researchers, I mean, feminists have had a field day with incels. The incel community has been the greatest gift to feminism of the past 5 years that one could imagine. It has supported and energized their conviction about all sorts of things. It doesn't even make sense. The feminist position is that incels have such a strong sense of entitlement to women. Of course, that is the feminist position about all men, but incels become a kind of, archetype of male entitlement, an entitlement supposedly so strong that when it is denied, they immediately resort to violence. In fact, the opposite is true. Incels do not have any sense of entitlement. They despair because the longing that they have for a sexual and romantic relationship has been extinguished.
Well
and what they feel in response is abject sadness and loneliness. It's just, the feminists couldn't be more wrong, but they have capitalized on the existence of this group. They seize on any expressions of anger as evidence that incels support violence, and they have magnified the threat that they represent. I mean, as this article points out, it's not clear that there have been many acts of violence at all committed. Everybody, of course, points to Elliot Rodger. There are a few others, and feminists enthusiastically mine through every example of violence to try to be able to claim that it has some kind of incel ideological origin. They've claimed that the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida was itself an act of incel terrorism. They've gone back and designated.
Did they ask the shooter's girlfriend about that?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's no, they don't care. Like, facts are damned. They're just determined to make this claim and to make it over and over again. They've claimed that Mark Lepine, the Canadian violent killer from 1989, the Montreal Massacre, whom we discussed last year on December 6th, they claim that he was an incel killer. There's no evidence whatsoever that he was celibate, that he hated women in general, that was in any way connected with loneliness or sexual frustration or anything like that. It doesn't matter. This is an attempt to smear the loneliest and the most abject, simply to reinforce feminist ideology. And in fact, I think that many feminists who write about incels with such gloating and glee actually prefer the idea that some of these young men be pushed into violence, because it confirms their narrative and their standing and their ability to push for the various policies and privileges that feminists are always pushing for.
And it justifies their fear.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what scares me, though, the most out of all of this is that you remember you mentioned Elliot Rodger. Right after that shooting, it was like the next day or 2 days later, I think it was a Daily Dot came out with an article trying to tie Elliot Rodger to A Voice for Men and to the men's movement, because we didn't have the term incels at the time.
Right.
So they made a quick attempt. Elliot Rodger was angry. Never mind that he killed men. Never mind that he has never had any known connection to any MRA group. No evidence he was ever even on A Voice for Men. Never commented anything like that. And I think what happened was that once they figured out they couldn't make that stick, they tried quite a few ways, couldn't make it stick. And then, just like you said, Janice, here comes the gift of the incel kingdom to feminists. Aha, now we've got somebody to directly, because Elliot Rodger was a guy, I don't know if you would call him an incel, he was a guy that couldn't get laid. But here's the problem to me, is that in any isolated, disenfranchised community, you have the potential for acting out violently.
Of course.
And the more you push those communities, we found out in the 1960s in Detroit and Watts, and as American cities were burning, that if you push people to the edge too much, they will act out violently. And I think that's what's happening here. I think you're right, Janice, the feminist collective could be no happier in the world indeed than to have some more of these guys kill some people. They can raise money on it.
Yeah.
They can strengthen their narrative on it. They can create new organizations to combat incels out
Yeah.
of it. They can get more government, more reach into government to control us in our individual private lives and to censor conversations like this,
Yep.
Yeah.
which is exactly what they want to do. Um, it terrifies me for that reason. I think the Canadian government is creating killers right now. And I don't think it matters to them whether they're creating killers. I think once the narrative, once the government gets wind of how it wants to go, that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
All truth, all consequences be damned. And this is it's a terrifying development to
Yeah.
see the Canadian government designating incels, which largely a group of isolated, sad, handicapped men as terrorists, up there with Boko Haram, with Al Qaeda, with ISIS. It's absolutely insane, but they're doing it, and they're gonna get worse about it, and it'll happen in my country too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yes.
Let's take a look at the last couple paragraphs in the article, Tom, just to look at their conclusions, which I thought were really insightful.
The last paragraph or the first ones?
The first one, yeah,
This
which
one?
these are that one, yeah.
Okay, good.
This is where they're talking about the implications of the terrorism designation. They say, second, it is clear that the terrorism designation and subsequently enhanced public scrutiny had a much higher impact on incel resentment over the recent period than in quarantine and isolation. As we just said, these are the results of that survey. It must be stressed that radicalization into violence remains a low base rate phenomenon, a product of there being very few actual terrorists relative to the number of those radicalized. Nevertheless, there has been a tendency to pay a disproportionate amount of attention to the violent extremist few rather than to investigate how or why the vast majority of similar others did not become violent extremists. I mean, there's the money line.
Amen.
You know, why are these researchers exaggerating the actual percentage of violence committed? Why are they not far more interested in understanding why most of these very lonely, isolated, alienated men do not commit violence, and figure out why that is, and figure out ways to make sure that even fewer commit violence? Because they're not interested. That is the clear implication of this line of argument, because it's much more satisfying and useful to these various research groups and government groups and lobbyists to emphasize the threat and to demonize and further isolate these people.
And they have a narrative to create. And don't let the truth get in the way of that narrative.
Don't let the truth get in the way. It is not about protecting the communities. This is not about limiting the potential for violence. Let's go back to how they finish off that paragraph.
All right.
Low base rate bias may exaggerate assessments of the likelihood of extremists engaging in violent terrorist activity, which can produce counter-effective consequences, including in assessing risk amongst intelligence professionals who are not going to know much about these people. They don't have time to go online and learn about them, or encountering violent extremism initiatives, which have been criticized in the past for stigmatizing and securitizing relations with entire communities, e.g. Muslims, for example, by restricting non-violent alternative spaces. This is key to air grievances, and thus inducing lone actors to believe they have no recourse other than violence. Why would you want to make lone actors feel that they have no recourse other than violence? Such circumstances can unintentionally well, maybe it's unintentional, facilitate greater rates of radicalization and violent extremism, cement a victim mentality that enhances in-group, out-group bias, which can lead to a reciprocal dehumanization of out-group members from amongst collectives that feel stigmatized or that may be used to justify the turn to violence for potential extremist actors. Ergo, second-order consequences of labeling a diverse and largely non-violent group as terrorist premised only upon a cognitive or rhetorical affinity may backfire. What a disaster in the making. It's an amazingly well-written paragraph
Really?
explaining the mistakes that are being made here.
Yep. Yep. It's calling them out. It's
May
calling them out.
backfire indeed.
May
Yeah.
This is
backfire.
again. I hate to step on the line with Godwin's law, but I just can't help but think about 1936 Berlin as I'm looking through what's happening here. There are parallels uh, to this that are just as frightening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now we're going to,
Certain
before
groups.
long, the Canadian government and probably the American government will want you to report if you think that you have an incel living next to you.
Right.
They
Exactly.
want their
Yeah.
information. And
Yeah.
man, once we go down that road, it is very, very difficult to come back. Once
Yep.
that becomes acceptable, then anything else you can do following that will become acceptable. And it's a terrifying reality.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and the double standards are so glaring. I mean, this is not just overkill in a general way. This is not just, hyper vigilance. We have had Antifa groups explicitly calling for violence for many, many years.
Not just calling for it.
We had BLM and Antifa enacting
Yes.
terrifying, if not terroristic, violence for months and months while they were cheered on by the media, while they were enabled by big tech, while they were supported and condoned by politicians and indeed law enforcement officers themselves who kneeled with them and respected them and everything else. So, this is not about, a hyper concern over the potential for violence and terroristic activity.
It is definitely
not any concern. But yeah, I've watched it happen here.
Yep.
Cities burning, buildings burning down, cops being shot, all kinds of stuff happening with Antifa and BLM. And there's a bunch of academic clowns sitting around going, no, it's the incels.
Yeah.
And I went to the SPLC website and I poked around a little bit and I searched on MRA and all kinds of nasty crap came up. I searched on Incel and all kinds of nasty crap came up about violence, this and hate that. And then I searched on Antifa. Almost nothing. There was about how they're really being treated badly. And so I did the same thing with Black Lives Matter. Same thing. They hardly said anything negative about them. Oh, they're being treated so poorly. It's just unbelievable when the human
they've just been nominated. They've just been nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. You can't get
more upside down than that.
Yeah, crazier than that. Yvette Falaci, who a teacher in the Bay Area in San Francisco, who has headed up what's it called, BAM, by any means necessary, which right in the title declares its commitment to violence to achieve its ends.
Yes.
She has operated essentially, to cheering adulation. She still has, as far as I know, her Twitter account. She still has her Facebook page. She has gone on record as inciting violence and praising, mass stabbings of peaceful protesters or peaceful demonstrators at various events over the past years. It's sickening.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Andy Ngo.
What's that, Paul?
No, I was just saying, you're looking at our future with that. Our
Yeah,
future is one. They've already started the violence in Portland and Seattle. Yep. Since the election. It has emboldened Antifa and BLM to act out even more violently. And there is not a governmental agency in the world. And this speaks to a bigger problem, that the American Department of Justice, the American FBI, they're done. They're no longer serving the purpose that they were intended to serve for this country. Anybody that thinks that there's anything but corruption left in the FBI or the DOJ, they're deluding themselves. Yep. They're not going to prosecute these people. They're not going to, they are going to give them a pass to do more violence while they designate people who are trying to reduce violence as violent threats. Yeah. Go figure the line of thinking on that, but that's what's happening.
I agree.
Crazy, I mean, crazy. How one can avoid coming to the conclusion that the agenda here is indeed to destabilize society to such an extent that a completely authoritarian or even totalitarian regime can come into power. It's hard to ignore or hard to avoid that conclusion. Maybe we should jump ahead, Tom, to the designation of the Proud Boys as a terrorist organization, or so at least it's the first step in making that happen. Yeah. Again, in Canada, good old Canada, where we've had MPs unanimously agree to urge the feds to designate the Proud Boys as a terrorist entity. This really, I mean, the Proud Boys formed precisely because they recognized that for years, long before Donald Trump, who was supposedly responsible for, creating division and polarizing and all this, long before Donald Trump, the Proud Boys recognized that it had become impossible for any non-leftist group to have a demonstration, to have a meeting, to invite a speaker onto campus without being beaten and terrorized by Antifa entities. And so they formed to oppose that violence. And now, this is the response. And you read articles about the Proud Boys and why, they should be designated terrorists. There's all this mention of their violence. Never any specifics offered. The leader of the Proud Boys, who is I mean, they're called a white supremacist group. The leader is not white. He identifies as Afro-Cuban. Like the Proud Boys was explicitly a multiracial, multi-ethnic organization that wanted to assert the right of patriotic Americans and indeed Canadians, but mainly it's an American organization, to gather peacefully and to articulate their aims and their agenda to make America great. It's such an upside down world that now these people are going to be, I mean, if they are designated a terrorist organization, which I assume they will be, it means that their assets, you can bet on it for sure. This guy, Jagmeet Singh, the leader of our socialist party, essentially. I mean, this is his whole modus operandi. It's the whole modus operandi of Justin Trudeau as well, to divide Canadians on the basis of race, to play up the threat of white supremacy and this is a male only organization, so that must mean it's a very terrible organization too, and to indeed polarize Canadians and to make them fearful and to make them ask for more government oversight. There's just been a survey of Canadians who found that 69% of Canadians want there to be more online hate monitoring, even if that means that freedom of speech is radically restricted. The Canadians are calling out for more restrictions on speech, because this is the extent to which my fellow Canadians have been brainwashed. It's amazing. So this now means that the Proud Boys, there will be greater powers on the part of law enforcement, to go after, to surveil, to enact greater punishments, to seize assets simply for being a member of this organization, which tried to make it possible for groups to speak on campus without being bullied and harassed and beaten by violent Antifa organizations. It's just awful.
Yeah.
Such is the world we live in now.
Yep. Members of Canada's Parliament have agreed to call on the federal Liberal government to formally designate the Proud Boys a terrorist entity. Crazy, crazy, eh?
Yeah. It's
not crazy if you consider one thing. I think the overall agenda here is you create one-party systems in all Western governments,
right,
where groupthink dominates and where we all become obedient little quiet consumer unit paying taxes.
Yes.
That's what they want. Ultimately control, keeping our mouths shut, keeping us working and paying taxes and buying shit from corporations that we don't need in order to escape from the actual slavery of what they're trying to turn our lives into. And of course, you have, unfortunately, after 2 full generations of fatherless children, which, I mean, I know there's fathers out there, but the predominant factor about the last 2 generations is fatherlessness.
Yeah.
And they raise up without empathy. This is why you see so many young people are like, yeah, let's curb free speech. They don't even recognize the value of it. And they certainly didn't have the guidance in their youth to show them what road they're actually going down with this.
Yep.
And I feel for them in the end, because in the end, shit, I'm 64 years old. What do I care? A few more years, I'll be gone. And they can have this world. The only thing I regret about dying is that I won't be around to watch on TV as they're fishing for lunch out of dumpsters. But eventually that's going to happen too, just like it did in Venezuela.
Yep.
That's the governance they're shooting for. Why? It absolutely makes no sense to me, except if you look at it in the context of being angry, is a natural consequence of fatherlessness. You raise generations of angry people who are looking for something to point the finger at for the misery in their lives. And if they can point it at us, older people who think along more right of center terms, then that's what you get. And the government is playing this for all it's worth. Woe is us in the future. Sad to say, but I think it's true.
Woe is us.
Well, it's certainly a very effective strategy of preventing a lot of young people from looking at what their governments are actually doing to them. So you create these enemies and you agitate people to be very, very angry at those designated enemies. And it means that they aren't able to critically evaluate the bill of goods that they're being sold by their governments.
Yep.
And you know what's really ironic and funny about all this is that so many of these young people imagine themselves to be socialists. That's what they think that they're supporting.
Yeah.
Guess where all the corporations are right now?
Yeah.
They're behind this all the way.
Yeah.
What we've got is revolutionaries on behalf of corporate America.
Yeah. Huge corporations. Yeah. This is fascism, really.
Yes, it is. No. It is fascism. Yeah. But you can't tell them that. They have no idea. They think that for some reason, they think that they're working against corporations, and they're thinking that in spite of everything that's right in front of their face at all times.
What's the term? I think it's useful idiot. Is that what the term is?
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately so. Yeah, it means that the large corporations working with these totalitarian governments exert complete control over our lives. Yeah. That's the definition of fascism.
And
that's what all these anti-fascist groups are. Yeah, the media, of course, as well. The bought and paid for media support it. And
if we had a working media, this would not be happening.
No, absolutely not. No.
If even half of them were questioning, saying, wait a minute, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
then the population would go, well, yeah, maybe you can't do that. But
Yeah.
because they're monolithic in their narrative, everyone kind of, oh yeah, of course. It's like it's
Mm-hmm.
very, very, they're hypnotizing their whole
Yeah.
population.
Yeah.
And
I
of
know
course, you don't have to
it's,
work too hard to hypnotize an idiot. And well, and honestly, with what we've done with education, we
yeah.
are bringing up idiots.
I
People
know,
aren't
Mm-hmm.
getting
I
educated
know,
anymore.
I know.
No,
Um,
no, we don't know
they're
anything about
absolutely,
history.
and we don't teach them to think critically at
Yeah,
all. We teach them to comply, just like Pink Floyd says, another brick in the wall. That's what
Yeah.
our education system
Mm-hmm.
is producing. They're not wired to think.
yeah,
They're wired to comply and to feel good, even when those feelings of goodness stem from delusions that they're living.
Yeah.
sad but
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Sad but true.
Yeah.
Yep. Well,
Uh,
Another happy day regarding men.
yeah, and can we make it even a little bit happier? You know, speaking of monolithic narratives, Biden's executive
mm-hmm.
order unlevels the playing field for girls.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we know, Biden has instituted a whole flurry of executive orders undoing much that the Trump administration accomplished and introducing the far left agenda of the Dems. And this is an interesting one.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Well,
essentially, of course, saying that there can be no discrimination in sports against so-called trans women, those who are born male but transition to female.
Yep. Oh
If there
boy.
ever was a case of hoist on your own petard,
Mm-hmm.
this absolutely it. And believe me, I feel for the girls here, especially young girls who would like to compete in
Yeah,
sports.
Yes.
And now they're told, oh, yeah, that other girl over there has a dick and balls, but you've got to compete against her.
yeah,
Um, and you better not say him, or we'll probably expel you from school. Needless to,
right.
not even to mention the sports program you'll be out of. So if you
Yeah,
complain, but look, ladies, you've just got executive ordered out of young girls' sports.
Yep.
You're
yeah,
done now. You don't have that anymore. You'll never win again. You can't compete with men. We know this. And yet, the guy you elected
mm-hmm.
says you have to compete against men. And so your daughters that you have just betrayed by supporting this agenda are going to be drummed out of sports activities. That will hurt their self-confidence. It will rob them of opportunities to realize a lot of their potential in life, because that's, sports is a great training ground for young people, both
Yep.
girls and boys.
Yep.
It's a wonderful place to learn confidence and to learn skills. Guess what? Girls, tough shit. You can't compete anymore. And your parents that voted for Joe Biden did this to you.
Yes. And this is one case where I think the narrative that's just being pushed that's so nutty is going to
Mm-hmm.
come back and haunt them, because it's going to wake some people up. Some people are going to go, wait a minute, no, that's not right. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is actually, we're ending on a positive note, because I think this is one situation where the narrative is going to create trouble for normal people, for people, just average Joes, average Jills out there. So we'll see. We'll see how this one turns
Yeah.
out. But I'm really looking forward to seeing the pushback from this one.
Mm-hmm.
I
Well,
think
a
there
number
will
of
be
states,
people.
I think, have already pushed back and have done whatever is necessary to nullify the effects of the executive order. So
Yes.
yeah, there's been a pretty immediate response.
Yeah. Good.
And
Good. Good.
but the
Good.
thing is, I have a hard time feeling empathy. They have been destroying boys in schools for
Mm-hmm.
decades.
Yep.
This and everybody looks the other way and whistles. You
Yeah,
don't see outraged parents coming there. What are you doing teaching my boy? He's toxic. What are you
toxic.
doing? Uh, putting him in a chair when he needs play activity, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
None of that stuff ever happened from parents. And you can bet that now that this has happened, there's going to be some irate parents at the school saying, "What are you doing to my daughter? Guess who doesn't give a shit?" Right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you do give a shit, but I'm in the same boat. You know, people send me these things all the time about the injustices to girls and young women who've been denied the opportunity to compete properly in sports, been denied sports scholarships, came second in a sport, cycling or whatever it happens to be, that they clearly should have won. And then when they complain about it, they're told they're transphobes, and, they have a psychological problem, a bigotry that they need to address. And yet I too have a lot of trouble feeling a great deal of empathy, because this is what feminist theory itself has created. It spent the last 50 years saying you can't say there are any differences between men and women, and gender is entirely what you imagine it is. And it's also partly socially constructed. I mean, that is all a complete incoherent schmozzle of notions, but doesn't matter. Feminism has pushed that when it mattered to women, when they wanted to invade male spaces, when they wanted to become firefighters or whatever it happened to be, or join, I don't know, the Marines, whatever. Then they would be outraged if it was mentioned that women are biologically different from men. Now, of course, they're asserting that there are biological differences. And yeah, okay. If this signals even the beginning of a pushback against feminist orthodoxy, I am quite willing to see a generation of female athletes sacrificed, because I think that's a relatively small price. Too bad. Yeah, sports is it's a great thing for people. It teaches all sorts of important lessons, but that's nothing compared to Me Too ideology, to the sacrifice of men as a result of a false accusation, whatever, all of the various horrific consequences of feminist ideology that we talk about every week. I don't see it as comparable at all. So correct. I say, bring it on. I look forward to the day when the entire Olympics, when not a single woman athlete wins an Olympic gold medal, because every single, I guess maybe women's gymnastics, I don't know, but every single sport will be invaded by trans women.
There are very small, thin, agile young men, some of which are going to identify as women, and they will go onto the mats and they will blow the women out of the water.
It's all about upper body strength.
Good point. Yep. So yeah, I look forward to that day. Bring it on then. If this is where we're at, let's take it right to the end.
I never imagined myself watching the Olympics for a good laugh, but I'm willing to try things new.
Good point. Yeah, I've got something to look forward to.
Absolutely.
And a schmozzle of notions. I won't forget that one, James.
Now, this hasn't reached the Olympic Committee yet, but it's only a matter of time, because the trans lobby, which is like 0.02% of the population, is a very powerful one.
It sure
and
is.
We should pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yep. Well, even when it comes to women's athletics, the fact of the matter is that men
are
good. That must mean we're ending.
Must be.
That's good. Are we finished? Good discussion.
I think we are.
Good discussion.
Well, no, we're not finished, but girls' sports are.
Yeah. On that note, you all take care.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
See you next time.